Hello, everyone. Checking in for week 4 of the course. First thing, obviously, you have your first essay due this coming Sunday. On the first part of the course, Epicureanism and its puzzles. Um, Release that. Um, Look at the video. I think I discussed both of the options. Remember that you need to respond to the question and you need to respond to just one of the questions, not both. Just choose one to respond to. One's about Nagel and his relationship with Epicurus. The second is about the asymmetry problem. So they're related, obviously, but they're different questions. So we finished the first part of the course, Epicureanism and its puzzles. It's pretty strenuous, I think, especially once we begin after reading Epicurus's profound thoughts about death, reading these contemporary responses by Nagel and then Bruckner and Fischer, which are difficult readings, I think. And it may be that the whole thing is a little dry insofar as we're talking about pretty narrow range of issues here, because I think Epicureanism forces us to do that. That is, Epicurus's view of death is quite narrow. Death is the absolute end of the person. It is not something that we experience because it's the end of all experience. So it's difficult to talk about because it's elusive what death is. If death is simply a termination, a limit, then it'd be very difficult to actually conceive of it, to talk about it. We can talk about related issues fairly easily, whether it's a bad thing for the one who dies, which is really the crux of the matter in Nagel and in Bruckner and Fischer. But it can be difficult to really nail it down, and that's, I think, the whole point of the Epicurean view of death. Moving into the second part of the course is moving into a new way of thinking, really, because it's a different subject entirely. We're talking about mortality, which is, as you'll see in the videos that I've made, is certainly a different topic. We're not really talking about death as in an event or non-event, or death in terms of the termination of life. We're not talking about death itself. We're talking about mortality, which is different and easier to talk about because mortality is us. Mortality is the condition of being the kind of thing that can and will die. And it may be that under Epicurean constraints, at least, it's very difficult to actually talk about death. I mean, in the sense of conceptually difficult to talk about it. What is it? It's not so difficult, I think, to talk about what mortality is because we live it. We are familiar with mortality because we're familiar with being mortal creatures. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that the thing opens up quite a bit. I think the discussion opens up quite a bit when we read Jonas's Burden and Blessing of Mortality and then Glenn Gray's The Idea of Death and Existentialism, because it's not so much that we're talking about death. We're talking about life, the life of a creature that is mortal, the life of a creature that can and will die. So things open up quite a bit in this second section of the course about mortality. Jonas's essay is difficult at times. It's not so easy, especially the first part about the burden of mortality. I think it's the second part is a lot easier to comprehend when he's talking about what he believes to be the blessing of mortality. I think that, as I say in the videos, I'm sure the first step, or the key to beginning to understand the essay, is getting straight his distinctions between the two senses of mortality, the can die, which is the ever-present possibility of death, and the will die, the ultimate necessity, inevitability of death, and how these are two different senses of mortality, that we can at any time die, possibility of death, and the notion that we know that we will die, that death is the ultimate end of every human being. Getting that distinction right is necessary to getting understanding his arguments about the so-called burden, which he associates with the ever-present possibility, and the so-called blessing, which he associates with the ultimate inevitability, the must die. Along the way, there's some complications. I mean, there's some difficult things. That's what the videos are for. But I think Jonas's essay is really pretty amazing essay. And again, I do think that the discussion to a large extent becomes less focused and narrow on conceptual questions about what death itself is, which is the Epicurean way of looking at it, and more expansive in terms of what the importance of death is to us and the way that we live our lives.